Welcome, everybody, and we appreciate you joining us this evening for our Davis Climate Action and Adaptation Plan Community Resilience and Equity Workshop. My name is Diana Jensen, and I am the CAP Project Director. And we'd like to start this evening off with an acknowledgement, native land acknowledgement. And Adelita Serena, who is one of our panelists this evening, is going to read this.
Thank you, Diana, and welcome everyone. And before we start, we're going to go ahead and acknowledge that we are on occupied, stolen land. And as we begin, we'd like to acknowledge that this land that we're gathered for thousands of years has been the home of the Patwin people. Today, there are 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes: the Kachil-Dihi Band of Wintun Indians of the Calusa Indian Community, the Quetzal-Dehe-Wintun Nation, and the Yocha-Dihi Wintun Nation. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands. Ometeo.
Thank you, Adelita. Appreciate that. Okay, so I just want to go over quickly our workshop agenda. So we're going to get through the welcome and some introductions, and then we have dispersed throughout this agenda some polling questions. So there's only 4, they are kind of dispersed throughout. So you'll see those pop up occasionally. And then we have our first panel, which will be talking about their community lived experiences. And then our second panel will be a discussion with stakeholders and equity advocates. And then we'll just do a brief summary and next steps. And then at the very end of the meeting, we will, staff will stay on for about an hour for anyone who hasn't had a chance to ask a question or to have discussion. So we will definitely leave quite a bit of time at the end for that if needed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie Lux, who is our project manager.
Thanks, Diana. And it's so great to see everyone here. This workshop is being put on because equity and inclusion are essential components of climate resiliency planning, of course, locally and worldwide. This workshop was added to the schedule of the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan community engagement in response to input and dialogue with various stakeholders, including our CAP Equity and Inclusion Working Group. And the workshop has been designed in response to these comments. So we're very pleased to be able to present this. As we'll say throughout this workshop, this is the beginning of a discussion. This is not the end of an equity and inclusion discussion. But the goals of this meeting are to listen to the lived life experience of community members impacted by climate change, to learn from each other about these impacts, and to begin the discussion of how this plan and its implementation can address equity and inclusion, or in other words, environmental justice, in the Davis context, while solving for the risks of climate change and reducing greenhouse gases. As many of you know, last week, the Davis City Council recognized last Friday, May 21st, as the World Day for Cultural Diversity for Dialogue and Development. This is a day that was set aside by the United Nations as an opportunity to deepen our understanding of the values of cultural diversity and to learn to live together in harmony. Today, we address the framework for community resilience and equity in the Davis context and the climate action planning process. We will continue this discussion with the community as we move through this project and we evaluate, select, and prioritize CAP, or Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, mitigation and adaptation actions. And this will be part of our equitable, inclusive, and measurable roadmap to community carbon neutrality by 2040. So we're very pleased to have you here today. We are hoping that everyone will note their name and any information you'd like to share about yourself in the chat. And if you'd like to be added to our email list for CAP events and updates, we'll be reminding you about that for a few times during this meeting. But please do provide your contact information so that we can contact you as we move forward the process. So that's it. I think we're ready to, this slide that's up talks about giving your name and contact info in the chat. The online survey is available, but will be finished by this weekend. And you can see all information on the City CAP webpage. If you go directly to the webpage for the city at cityofdavis.org, and there is a link to the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan in the Spotlight section. And on that page, you'll also see that if you have special areas of interest or concern, you can email the project team, and the link is in the website. So I think we're ready to go on to the first polling question.
But right before we do that, I just wanted to also say that we do have a listserv that we've started now. So providing your email today is great, but you can also sign up for the listserv from our website. And then the next thing I just wanted to ask is if all the participants could turn off their video during the panel discussions, just so that the panelists are the ones that are more visible and everybody can kind of focus on. So just a request if we can. So going on now to our first polling question.
So I will read aloud the polling question. What can the City of Davis do to prioritize equity and inclusion in the CAP planning and implementation actions, especially for vulnerable and underserved community members? And what we would like you to do, there's 9 or 10 answers in each of our polling questions. Please select up to 5. This is a little bit difficult because we can't see them all at the same time, but there are a total of 10 answers. Jennifer, is there any way that people can see the whole poll all at the same time? Yes, if you click on the button to maximize, you can see all of those. So, and this will be the same question for each of the polling questions, but they are different topics. So this one is community resilience, and we'll have other topics for future polls.
So Carrie, when are the results of the polls going to be available?
I believe that we're going to show them on the screen in
Okay.
real time.
I wasn't sure if that was happening this evening.
Yes. So as I said, if you can only see the window, the smaller window, you can click on the maximize button at the top of the poll, and that will show you all of the choices. And we have about half of our participants have completed the poll. So I think we'll wait another 2 or 3 minutes and then close the poll and move on to our first panel.
All right, should we go ahead and close the poll and move on?
Yeah, looks like there's 1 or 2 people still filling out the poll. Let's wait let's give a warning of half a minute and then
All
close.
right.
Oh, well.
Oh, you've already closed it? That's fine.
I closed it. Yeah, I did close it.
Okay. So do we click on share results?
Sure.
So these are the results of the poll. The most important one is providing resources, funding, and incentives for greenhouse gas reduction to community members at 75%. The other options are between around 20 to 50%. And it appears that the second top choice is to provide job creation programs and support to community members. And the third choice is provide childcare for working parents. So we will screenshot this and have it available. Thank you.
Great.
So I think we're ready to go to the first panel discussion. And so I'm going to turn the program over to Gloria Partida. Thank you, Gloria.
Thank you. Thank you, Carrie. And thank you to the city for putting this on. And I'm especially appreciative of the fact that diversity and or that inclusion, environmental justice has been added as part of an important piece of this work. And I'm the chair of the Davis Phoenix Coalition, in addition to being mayor. And the Davis Phoenix Coalition is a nonprofit that works on diversity and inclusion. And so this topic is very important to me. I started a lot of my work in activism around environmental issues in the neighborhood that I was in, that was very deeply affected by, in Los Angeles, I was very deeply affected by things like, you know, smog and regulations around, you know, warehouses that were close to where a lot of underserved people were living. And so this has been a topic that has been under the radar, I think, for a very long time when we have discussions around you know, the environment. And so I'm very pleased to see that, you know, that this has come to the forefront. And so this panel is focused on collecting lived experiences from some of our community members. And so we have, this panel has 3 community members that I am very pleased are here today. Our first panelist is Can Foster, who is a mother, educator, and a youth and community organizer. Her family has lived in Davis for 5 years. She currently lives in affordable housing. Her children attend school at Holmes and Peregrine Project. Can and her family are involved in many community-based organizations in the area, such as the Soul Collective, Mothers Out Front, the Davis Native Family Group, and Davis School Arts Foundation, and CAP City Drum and Dance Powwow Group. And then our second panelist is Tree Kilpatrick, who is the owner of the Cloverleaf Farm, which is a small artisanal orchard. And Tree has lived in Davis for over 20 years. He has a master's in international agricultural development from UC Davis and studied sustainable pomology. He's been working in Davis Farmers Market for over 20 years for good hummus produce and in various capacities in Cloverleaf for 6 to 7 years. And then lastly, we have Xochitl Torres, who is a 6th grader at Montgomery Elementary and was this year, City of Davis was one of our Tong Hai Win awardees, and has been advocating for climate change since 2017, when she joined the Run for Salmon. And her mom is also a well-known community activist, and so she has been helping her mom in her activism. And I must say that I have worked at Marguerite Montgomery for about a year now, and so what I notice about Xochitl is that she's always reading. So I often worry about her running into things because she's walking and reading at the same time, and so it's very admirable, but sometimes it's a little unnerving. So the question that we have for this panel, and this is more of a narrative type panel, and so we're really wanting to understand how climate change and the conversations that we're having around climate affect you in your personal life, and what you have noticed about the effects of climate, and the conversations that we've been having around climate in your personal life. So I will ask everyone to introduce yourselves and tell us why you feel that climate change has had a personal impact on your life. And so we will start with Ken Foster.
Hi, thank you for sharing space with me. My name is Ken Foster. Yeah, I'm a mom in Davis, and I have 6 children and 1 grandchild, actually. I just wanted to honor Xochitl because it's amazing that she is on here, having youth involved, especially Native youth involved, is just an amazing opportunity for me to learn from these children that are so aware and know everything and are very transparent. And yeah, so I'm just very thankful that she's on. And if she would like to go before me, she can. But what was the first question that I'm answering?
So we're just asking you to share what your experiences have been, your personal experiences have been in how climate change has, or how the work around climate change and has affected you.
Oh, okay, me personally, yeah. So I do live in affordable housing that is actually built right in between a train track, which is, a lot of constructions going on, and then a non-organic farm that's on the other side of my apartment complex. I did notice that a lot of the low-income housing is close to freeways, or non-organic farms. Railroads are places that are unsafe. Monday, there was a gas leak in front of our house, maybe 100 feet from our house. We were evacuated from our house. We have 2 kids under 2, and then also one that had recently had heart surgery, open heart surgery, when she was 1 month old, that I truly feel could have had, she may have got that problem due to where we were living. But anyways, we were evacuated from the house, and, we had to get the dog, and we only had a certain amount of time. So stuff like this happens. There's a lot of knowledge that is told within the community, and luckily I'm out in the community talking to as many people as I can. But I know that, like, my neighbors, they don't always have access to information about food or organic foods or affordable foods or things that are going on at the farmers market. So that has been an issue. My son got asthma after we moved to Davis. So I don't know, maybe we caught it at that time, or it got more severe, but that was one of the things that had happened to me living in Davis. Have I learned a lot while being in Davis? Yes, because I make connections with, I feel, the right people. I think that the lack of ethnic studies, learn about, like, indigenous ways and indigenous ways of living, growing food, and relationship with the earth is a problem as well. So these are some of the things. I have a long list, but those are some of the things that have affected our family.
Great, and it's good to know that you are out in the community and that you are gathering stories and information on things that are affecting your neighbors and people that are in similar situations, because that is really important going forward, and especially for this place that we're at right now, where we're trying to make sure that the things that we address are going to reach far enough. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, so next we will have Tree. And if you can introduce yourself and then share your story on how climate change has had an impact on your personal life experience.
Okay, hello everyone, I'm Tree Kilpatrick. I just recently took over ownership. I've been working at this small orchard that's off the Kidwell exit between Davis and Dixon. We grow stone fruit pretty much exclusively. We have a few other things, but mostly that's what we're focused on. I'm excited to be in charge and have this new opportunity to farm. It's kind of a struggle for a lot of people to get farms, and I kind of feel like I got lucky kind of stumbling into this. And we market all over the place around here. We have Davis Food Co-op. Unfortunately, we can't do the Davis Farmers Market because it's too crowded, but we do go in Sacramento, and we have a CSA program and things like that. So that's kind of the farm and my farmer hat. And so, like, as a farmer, of course, the weather is the biggest factor in success or failure of what's going on. The kind of trees that we have in particular are pretty affected by changes in seasonal temperatures. So there's something called chilling hours, and those have been decreasing due to less fog and changes in the climate around here. It hasn't necessarily affected our orchard per se yet, but those are the kind of changes that will come. And the other thing that's a huge factor in what we do is water, and the dependability of water's availability. And so, this drought that's happening now and kind of the confusing nature of how precipitation has changed or will change due to climate change is a huge deal. In terms of personal effects, I guess, it's pretty similar to everyone else. We have to work outdoors, and when it's smoke storms are going on, or the heat is unbearable, it's everybody doesn't like that, of course, and it's very hard to live life like that, but we're dependent on it for our livelihood. We have to be out there harvesting and processing stuff. So I would say we're a little bit more at risk than some people in terms of the effects of climate change.
So can you, this last year we had, some pretty bad air quality,
Mm-hmm.
and, probably longer than I have ever noted. Can you speak a little bit about how you dealt with that? And does that have any effect on your growing at all?
Well, we were lucky in that the fires started right about the end of our main harvest season. So we didn't have a whole lot of stuff that we still needed to harvest. So we were able to kind of change our schedules and not spend as much time. We did have to do some stuff. We got N95 masks from the county, and we were wearing, protective equipment, so to speak, when we were out there. But we tried to schedule around it. We tried to just minimize the number of things that we had to do when that was happening. But it certainly was a big problem, just something that we would have operated a little bit differently and maybe had more tasks done if we wouldn't have had to take that kind of break because of that air quality problem. And yeah, those kind of factors, they can change your schedule and make it a lot harder for you to successfully harvest crops and make money off of your farm products if you don't have the ability to be outdoors, because that's just where we are all day, every day, basically.
And so you noted that this was at the end of your harvest season, but I know that, for instance, like in the vineyards, they had a lot of issue with the air quality and the smoke, and it affecting the fruit actually. But I guess
Yeah.
your fruit was already harvested by that point. But do you know if there are any long-lasting effects on your orchard from this, or is this something that you will have to wait to determine?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything specific that we could pinpoint from that air quality in terms of our trees. They seem to be kind of as healthy as they were last year and the year before. So yeah, it's kind of hard to determine that kind of stuff. Specifically for grape growing and winemaking, the skin of the grapes absorbs the smoke, and then that becomes part of what is in the flavor of the wine, and that's a flaw. We didn't have that problem with fruit, and I'm not sure if it's the same sort of effect that can happen, but yeah, I mean, the smoke in the air, is probably most detrimental to the humans, but it does affect plants in negative ways as well.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then Sochi, I'm going to ask you the same question, if you will introduce yourself, and then tell us how climate change has had an impact on your personal life experience.
Hello everyone. My name is Sochi. I'm in 6th grade. Yeah, and growing up, I had, a lot of, my mom always would drag me to her meetings, climate action meetings and social justice meetings and all that. So I kind of grew up around that. And so I grew up hearing how much climate change can and will affect us. What it's going to be like if we leave it alone, and what it's going to be like for the future. So, that's something I was always around and something I always heard about. So growing up, I started getting involved too. Mostly it was because my mom forced me to. And then I ended up realizing, thinking back on when I was 7 and sitting in the room with the elders and other everyone else, and just being there, I realized just how important it is to advocate for climate action. And about 2.5 years ago, I believe, we found out that I had asthma. So that also really affected me, the climate, the air quality. I was a very active person. I still am, just less active. I would go out, I had swimming, I had basketball, I had gymnastics. So I had, I was always out. And so the air quality really affected me. And when the fire started, we were staying at a friend's place, and we had to move back to the house because they were out in, not in the city. So we had to move back because the air quality was really bad, and I was getting coughing fits every day. So, just I'm not very good at public speaking.
You're doing great.
Yeah.
So
That's
when
always something I was.
When we had the really bad air quality, did you use an N95 mask And did you notice that affected your asthma?
Yeah, it helped some, but it was very uncomfortable wearing the mask. And I had never really worn masks before. So, I would be there and my brother's whining next to me like, "Can I take this off, Mom? Can I take this off?" So, the masks really help. It's just, it can't filter out everything. So I was still getting coughing fits and all that.
Sure. And then, one thing that I noticed at the elementary schools is that, it's really hard to keep kids inside, especially when the air quality is really bad. And also the asphalt out there on the blacktops gets really hot. And I remember that at one point they said, well, if it gets really hot, spray the kids. They give you a spray bottle and you're like supposed to spray the kids. And I just thought, wow, that is, this is where we're at. How do you feel about that?
Yeah. I noticed how hot it's getting. Now I have this tan from swimming, and I have much lighter skin than I do on the backside of my hand, and that's supposed to be like my whole body, but now it's all tanned and all that. And I do mostly like in the spring swimming, so I normally don't get tanned, but I'm like significantly more tan than I am usually, and that's just like showing how hot it is, how
Yes. Well, thank you. I will come back and ask more questions as they come up. I noticed that there was a question in the chat about, where are our ag workers that could speak to the effects of, climate change. They are obviously, one of the most vulnerable groups that are most affected by this climate change. And I will note that we did do outreach and try to get some representatives. It was very difficult to get people that were, willing to come on to this panel. That was part of our challenge. But I will ask, I know that Ken, as she mentioned earlier, has had a lot of outreach with the community. And Ken, if you're willing, would you like to speak on that behalf or speak to that particular question? And also, Tree, I know that you must employ people. Is Ken available?
Were you asking what kind of work, what kind of community work?
Right. No, I'm asking, you get out into the community and you hear sort of some of the challenges that our community members have. And if you can, sort of share some of the stories that you've heard.
Yeah, a lot of stories that I hear from some of my community members and people that, I garden with, talk about the digital divide for their children. They talked about how they didn't have access, and we were part of this too, to lunch during the pandemic. They do talk a lot about upper heart or problems within like the top part of their body, heart, throat, ears, headaches. And I hear that, I don't know, I'm not sure if that could be from, whatever farms are around or, the fires in unsafe situations. I've suggested, and maybe overly suggested and probably shouldn't, like, oh, why don't you just stay home, and having that kind of like, there's an opportunity for you to stay home. a lot of people don't have the opportunity to stay home. They have to go to work. They have to take their kids to school. They have to walk their kids to school. And these, they don't have that option. So that was one thing, that I've heard a lot. And they have to walk their 5 kids or their 4 kids to school. And trying to put a mask on a very young person to explain to them that there's fires going around is just so difficult. And then at the same time, we're trying to promote this relationship with like gardening and a relationship with the planet. And we're seeing these fires, and it's extremely hot at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and April even. And then we're expecting our kids, like Sochi said, to go and do active things like swimming and basketball. And so I know that there's a lot of parents that have those concerns, like, what should we do? What can we do? Raise awareness. How do we do that? So these are, I know a lot with the frontline workers, the frontline farmers sometimes can't even afford to pay, to afford the food that they're, providing for the people in our city. And that sometimes is like heartbreaking too. Then, that's when we try to call and get these resources to these people that just might not have the time to find those resources because they're working for, from really early in the morning to really late at night, and then having to work with their pretty big families. So just a few things.
Right. Yeah. And so I know that, for instance, I have a son who has disability, and when it gets really hot, it's really difficult for him. But he recently, and it was surprising to me that he collects SSI because he's in a wheelchair, and just recently he was able to collect food stamps. He was not eligible for them before. And I think, and I am not really sure, but I think that that if, like at farmer's market, he could get like more for, like, his food stamps go farther there. Like they'll give him like extra, or there was a program, I'm not sure if that's still available, but just like knowing what the resources are and knowing like where you can get like organic food and things like that is like,
yeah. And
really
for young
people. What's that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, young people sometimes too, sometimes with young people, even providing these kind of resources and giving them that information, because there's such a huge class divide in Davis, it's sometimes uncomfortable for young people as well. So trying to make it so that it's a personal thing, and like you're saying, being able to use like a card to easily access foods. But even nutrition and health is, there's a particular I don't know, people are teaching kids of like what kinds of foods to be eating, but not necessarily are they within every community that live in Davis. So that could be different to different kids. So that, balances are different, and that's another thing too, like you're saying. So I think that's really cool. I think that, did they say that like a lot of kids are going to be getting that, not just like lower income children, which I think in Sacramento they have, where all kids get, nutritious free lunch at some of the schools over there, which
right.
Yeah, which it helps with that divide, because all the kids have access to it, so nobody can make fun of the other kids for having a particular type of free lunch or something like that.
Sure. And so, Tree, if you can just elaborate a little bit on what you thought the experiences were for your ag workers, and how you see the change in climate, affecting them.
Yeah, I mean, we're a unique farm in that we mostly employ a really small crew of people that work seasonally for us, and they're not the traditional mode of farm worker. They're mostly younger people just graduated from college and things like that. But I mean, what we do to try and ameliorate the climate change, the heat and smoke, is just schedule and we start super early. We kind of work around the heat of the day by having tasks that are less difficult and onerous during that time. And then we also just, we're able to, because of the way our farm works, take a break during that period when there was real smoke danger everywhere. But from what I've heard, it was a real difficult time for everybody when the food still needed to be produced and harvested, but there was so much environmental risk being outdoors during that smoke era. So yeah, I in terms of specifics, I don't have anything about our farm, but for farm workers in general, it's always been one of the hardest jobs, and it's just getting harder with the way that things are getting hotter, and risks like smoke are coming more often than they used to.
Sure. Okay, so I think that we are at the end of the time for this particular panel, and want to thank everyone for sharing. And I believe that we have another poll that we are going to give out at this point.
Oh, I am. Wait, sorry. Give me 1 second. I don't see why it's. Oh, there we go. Now I see the drop down. Here you go. So again, we'll mention that if what you see on your screen is a window, you can hit the maximize box at the top of your screen, and you'll be able to see all of the options that are available. And the question again is, this is the public health and the environment poll that we are doing. The question is, what can the City of Davis do to prioritize equity and inclusion in the climate action and adaptation plan, planning and implementation actions, especially for vulnerable and underserved community members? We're asking you to select up to 5 responses for this. And we'll give enough time for people to have a chance to answer this. And hopefully some of these questions do address much of what's been in the chat comments, which we really appreciate people adding their concerns and thoughts in the chat. So So we have a little over 70% that have voted now. So we'll wait about a little less than 1 more minute for people to finish up. Okay, Jennifer, I think you can end the poll. And if you'd like me to, I can summarize. I think you can all see the results up here. The most important, the highest ranked response was to improve public health service response during extreme weather events like heat waves and wildfires. And part of that answer is to provide resources to register complaints about unsafe working conditions during these events, which might be in conjunction with the county or other ways, but we know that it's important to have ways for people to be able to identify who they can go to if there are concerns. The second highest ranking choice was to provide expanded mental health and wellness services. And just related to that, I will say we did have a panelist who was hoping to be here tonight, Tessa Smith, who's an outreach and cultural specialist for the Yolo County Health and Human Services Administration, but she had a family emergency, so she was not able to be here to share her perspective, but we will be continuing to talk with her. And it looks like the third ranked answer is to increase tree planting over paved areas and bike paths to reduce urban heat island. So thank you to everyone for participating in the poll, as well as putting your comments in the chat. So I believe, yes, we're going on to the second panel discussion. So Jonathan, I'm going to let you take over, and we have turned off the video for everybody who is not on the panel. So.
Great, thank you so much. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. And I apologize in advance. My internet is misbehaving a bit today, so hopefully I will not freeze. So good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to Carrie for the opportunity to be part of this event and moderate this panel. I'm Jonathan London, and I am a professor at UC Davis in the Department of Human Ecology and our faculty director of the Center for Regional Change. My research and teaching focuses on environmental justice and community engagement in that effort, studying how people fight for racial and environmental justice. And in an earlier career, I worked in youth-led action research. So I was super excited to hear Sochi's really eloquent words about youth leadership and youth power. So I'm going to really briefly introduce our esteemed panel, and then we will launch into the conversation. So Marlon Garcia is a second-year student at UC Davis. She's a political science and economics double major and is minoring in community and regional development. And I will editorialize and say that is my major. So Marlon, maybe you could triple major and do CRD also. She's currently part of the Sunrise movement in Davis. She occasionally works with the Yolo County Climate Emergency Coalition. She does paralegal work on immigration. She's been an active participant in the CAP Equity and Inclusion Working Group, and she tries to make sure that her efforts aim to address climate change and immigration matters. We're also joined by Anush Jajorian, who's the co-founder of the Apoyolo Project, which is a partner of the Yolo Interfaith Immigration Network, began in 2020. And it's helping to keep Spanish-speaking immigrants in Yolo County housed, fed, and safe during the COVID-19 pandemic. She was selected for the Davis Brindley Award for Community Service. She also coordinates the Yolo Rainbow Families Parent and Teen Group for the Davis Phoenix Coalition. And she's the principal of Inclusive Futures Consulting, which provides support for educators, parents, and institutions to teach children about identity differences and how to be inclusive across identity lines. And then finally, we have Adelita Serena, who is the climate action organizer in the capital region of California for Mothers Out Front, a member of the YOLO Climate Emergency Coalition, the Woodland Sustainability Advisory Committee, and maestra of traditional Aztec dance group Calpuli. I'm going to mess this up. Adelita, help me. Tlayotl.
Tlayolo.
Tlayotl. Tlayotl. Thank you.
Great, everything else. I just want to say that.
Okay. And I will also say that Adelita was generous enough to come and lecture in my environmental justice class and was an amazing hit of the whole quarter for the students. She's passionate about her using her ability to communicate with underserved communities to improve their conditions by providing resources and services. And as the mother of 2 teenage boys, she's become increasingly concerned about climate change impacts that they're already experiencing, from extreme heat to wildfires. She's also passionate about developing and centering the leadership of women from marginalized communities to achieve energy democracy and preserve a livable climate. And as Carrie mentioned, we unfortunately are not joined by our planned 4th panelist, Tessa Smith, but we've got a fantastic group here nonetheless. So I'm going to start by asking each of our panelists, and we'll go in the order that I introduced them, Marlon, then Anush, then Adelita. If you could first, just for a couple minutes, tell us about your own vision for climate justice. What is it? What does it look like? How would we know it when we saw it? Marlon, first to you.
So my vision, it looks a lot like having inclusiveness, restorative justice, and transformative justice. And when I speak of inclusiveness, what I'm trying to say is, we have to ensure that the resources and the aid that we provide for community members, most especially the underserved ones, that we make sure that those resources are accessible, easily accessible. The climate crisis tends to intertwine a lot with the problems, with other problems like health or food sustainability problems. And oftentimes the frontline communities tend to be the minority communities. Now, when I speak of restorative justice, it's pretty self-explanatory. So I think like one of the big steps towards that was having land acknowledgements. But I think we can take it a step further by giving back some of these lands back, or providing spaces for Indigenous folks or other minority community members who we took a lot from, by giving them safe spaces where they can share their stories, express their concerns, embrace their traditions, and just, having a place where they can be themselves. And when I'm regarding transformative justice, I think one thing that I learned within one of my CRD classes was that we need to set spaces and initiate conversations where we realize that, or we can identify that history matters, race matters, justice matters, language matters, and our futures matter. But yeah.
Wow, fantastic. So nicely said. So many important concepts there. Restorative justice, land back, Indigenous people, thinking about, those most marginalized. So thank you so much for that. And I'm going to ask you to dig into many of those things as we go on in our conversation. So I'm going to turn to Anush now to give us your vision of climate justice.
So one of my guiding principles in all of my work is taken from disability studies, which is universal design. And so part of the concept of universal design is that when you build systems that are meant to be accessible for people who have the most difficulty accessing any kind of resources. So, obviously in disability studies, we are looking at people with disabilities who have trouble accessing, like for example, in this conversation, we'd be having trouble because they are deaf and can't hear the conversation. And the closed captions are, kind of hit and miss, for people who are blind, for people with mobility issues, people with chronic illness, for whom, if we're talking about climate, like heat and air quality are a big issue for people who have chronic illness. So by putting in systems that make resources accessible for people who have trouble accessing them, you actually end up benefiting everyone in ways that are unanticipated. So a classic example of this is curb cuts. So when you have curb cuts in sidewalks, you know, they benefit people who use wheelchairs or have to use mobility devices. It ends up benefiting mothers who, or fathers who should be pushing strollers. And, you know, if there are kids riding bicycles on the sidewalk, if that is allowed, then it's easier for the bicycles to pass, for example. And so one of my experiences in working with Apoyolo this past year has been, you know, in a lot of cases, you have institutions that are trying to work to make systems and resources accessible. And so they're kind of starting over here, and in order to make it more accessible, they get here. And yet the community is still way over here. And so, you know, they're still not meeting people's needs. And in order to ameliorate this problem, you really just have to go to the community themselves and say, you know, what are things that, you know, what are the barriers that make things difficult for you? And try to really work on, you know, building from people's lived experiences, because what you think may be the issues are not the issues at all, or there's just, you know, what you think there are this many issues, but there's actually this many issues. So accessibility, you know, when we talk, you know, universal design is usually applied to people with disabilities. You can also apply that to, you can apply the concept to any community. So in my case, we were talking about our Spanish-speaking immigrant communities, for which, you know, language is a barrier, security is a barrier. Access to the internet is a barrier. And so all of these things kind of stack in a way that just ends up making some solutions impossible. So that's, I see that a lot in climate stuff too. There's a lot of things that are aimed at people who have a lot of resources, a lot of access, a lot of cultural capital. And so we're doing things that end up being focused on like individual consumers rather than working on systemic changes that are going to benefit everyone. And so where these communities don't have to work as hard to be part of the climate solution. And so, you know, I really want to focus on systemic solutions rather than individual ones.
Thank you. That's fantastic, Anushin. Yeah, I think that question of systemic is so important, the systemic lens that can bring so many of the issues together, all these different intersecting systems, which you touched on, and so many other people in the chat have brought in so many different issues here. And you know, if we can create some kind of framework that can bring all those together, centering equity, centering inclusion, as you talk about with disability studies, so crucial. So thank you for that. So I'll turn now to Adelita and ask you to tell us about your vision for climate justice.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you to Marlon and Anush for, you know, your ideas and thoughts on this, because, you know, many of them are my own as well. And so want to lift up what they said, but also really, you know, climate justice. And the one thing we really have to remember is that the reason we're in the situation we're in is because of fossil fuels. And that is the main, you know, offender of climate change. And we have to tackle that problem like ASAP. And it is, you know, the communities, frontline communities and communities of color. And when I think that are at the very front of that, when I think of equity and justice, I think of the communities that are living right next to, you know, oil rigs and drilling, and that are getting sick and live every day breathing, you know, very toxic air. So for us, you know, we have to really put the pressure on our governor and our state leaders to, take executive action to transition us off fossil fuels. And not just that, but to implement a setbacks for vulnerable communities, because California is the only state that doesn't have setbacks for sensitive sites such as schools, neighborhoods, and workplaces. So really, focusing on the fossil fuel industry, it is a giant beast. They're very powerful, the richest, most, powerful, industry in the world. And really, forcing them, we have to ask the governor. We've been telling him to take executive action for his whole, his last 2 years, basically. And before that, we were asking, Governor Brown. So we really, really, really have to focus on that and those communities that are living right next to the most toxic air. And then, really then focusing on the just transition that follows that with good jobs that will replace that industry, green jobs, training opportunities for the community, and when I think about that, I think about, we got to start young, high school students, that are coming out looking to go to college, providing opportunities, training opportunities for them. The state has, funding for that. And so really, and the federal government currently is going to start funneling money for that. So developing programs, developing relationships with labor, and really, trying to connect those dots so that we can bring it into our communities here. We're in an agricultural community, so we need to really think about, the farmers and our water, and how are we going to sustain that industry and do it equitably, because our farm workers are out there having a really strong response when we are experiencing climate emergencies, like climate crisis, such as the fires and the heat and water shortages, having a response, that is quick and that is keeping people out of danger, keeping vulnerable communities out of toxic situations that will make them sick. Bye, son. And then, for instance, even students, when, now that we've learned from the pandemic, the districts are aware how to keep students out of school when there's, danger. I remember when, the first fires, the campfire hit, I felt like the districts were kids were still going to school and playing sports. My son played football, and they were still having practice, and there was ash falling from the sky, and they had junior varsity and varsity teams out there training for hours. And I was furious about that, of course. So things like that, there has to be a proper response to protect our communities, but really attacking the problem at the root, and that is, really addressing the fossil fuel industry and putting the pressure on and demanding a just transition. And the fossil fuel industry is currently, developing technologies for, to be in the green industry. So they have the money, they have the scientists, and they're going to try to patent the next, green technology so they could get on that. So we need to really start to pressure our leaders, state, local, and national, that this is the answer. The only answer is to get off fossil fuels and do it in a way that is equitable, where there's jobs, training opportunities for our youth, and for adults that are in the industry, so that they're not no, we don't want to lose our oil jobs. There's got to be alternatives, and so that those families have somewhere else to go, and that there is a soft handoff, right? So that's what it looks like to me. And you know, the same goes for, again, you know, our agriculture industry. There's got to be a just transition into something that is an alternative to some of the, you know, industrial ways we're growing food, the industrial ways that our farm workers are out there. We need to, you know, think like small local community gardens. We need to think about folks that live in apartments that, you know, don't have backyards to grow their food. How do we provide them access to do so? Things of that nature. And of course, you know, greening, you know, creating, you know, green belts in areas that are, you know, dry and dusty. And yeah, that is my vision.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Adelita. I think you've written the CAP plan right there, basically. We've got the measures. Yeah. And yeah, talking about getting things at the root, the climate addiction or the fossil fuel addiction, those setbacks. I know that there was a setback in that there was a proposal that was making its way through for setbacks that didn't get through this session, but an important campaign to continue for sure. So I want to ask some specific questions of each of you here, and I'll start with Marlon, and this is, I mean, there's some nice connection with Sochi as well here, but given that you are a student currently and are working with a youth-oriented activism group with Sunrise, I wonder if you could say just a little bit about the role that you see that the young generation, the K-12 students, college students in this struggle for climate justice.
I think the youth plays a big role in all of this, especially because kind of going into what Anush had said a little bit before, I would say the youth to an extent counts as part of a minority community just because we haven't contributed much to the damages that have been made, but we are going to be some of the people, or we are going to be the group of people that suffer a lot from this. It is our future that is at stake. So our voices do truly matter in this situation, and I think it's important that we acknowledge the voices of the youth. I think that's another problem with the trying to achieve climate justice, because the adults are used to, or we're conditioned to believe that we can't provide much or bring much to the table. We don't have our voices heard as much. So with Sunrise Movement, it's not just in Davis. I would say it's a worldwide movement. It's very supportive of the Green New Deal, and I think the youth has done a wonderful job with putting our voices out there and putting our concerns and expressing our ideas just to achieve a better future.
Thank you so much. Yeah, very, very powerful. So turning to you, Anush, you laid out so nicely and such an elegant theory not theory, but really approach to justice in general, that disability, and thinking about when we take care of those who are most vulnerable, we all benefit. And similarly, when we don't deal with that, we all go down. So I wonder if you could just say a little bit about, if we were to think about Davis and its CAP, and its climate action plan, adopting that kind of universal design, what would that look like? What would be the sorts of issues they ought to look at, and how could they really adopt that approach?
You know, first thing I think of is some way of making solar more accessible. I mean, it seems like we have such resources in solar. We have abundant sunshine. We have, you know, relatively abundant land. I came here from LA. Like, it seems like there's a ton of land around here for solar panels. And yet, you know, putting solar panels on your house is obviously very expensive. If you rent, you don't have any control over whether your building has solar panels or not. Opting into entirely clean energy is more expensive than coal and oil powered energy. So if there were any way to simply make solar more accessible, you know, it's getting hotter. People are going to be using more air conditioning. So if there's any way that we could make that process cleaner for everyone, that I think would be a huge step forward. And, you know, along with that is we have a huge transportation issue in Yolo County in general. I think Davis is probably, I mean, I wouldn't know, I bike and I drive my car, but you know, I think within Davis, transportation is not too bad, but within, you know, for Yolo County, and I know, for example, the folks who live in the Davis migrant camp, like trying to get to town, to go to the doctor, to go shopping. It's, you know, Natalia Deeb Sosa, who's here today, she is, you know, fundraising for lifts for people in order to come into town and use those services. You know, if there's a way for kids to get to Davis more easily, there would be more programs that they would find, you know, that they would be able to benefit from. But unfortunately, you know, public transportation, YOLO bus from that area, those areas into Davis is really scarce. And so that's other ways that, you know, people are using individual cars rather than public transportation. So, and then I keep coming back to housing. You know, we have a lot of people in Davis for whom housing is completely inaccessible, who are putting enormous amounts of their income into housing. And, you know, in order for them to be able to participate in being part of the climate solution, you know, just making the places where they live more climate, you know, more climate smart, I guess. And, you know, and hopefully then making their utilities, for example, more affordable, because there's so many families that we have who have racked up an enormous amount of debt because they haven't been able to pay their utilities during the pandemic. So these are just some of the solutions that have come up just in the process of trying to keep these families afloat during this period of health and economic crisis.
Thank you so much. Yeah, again, laid out so many of the key themes: housing and transportation, and you know, energy. And there's some great things in the chat around Valley Clean Energy and solar subsidies. And I know there's a policy proposal now to put surcharges on home, you know, home energy generation, which I know is quite controversial, something to look at. Well, I'm going to give you the last word, Adelita, and I will say with apologies, we just have a couple minutes because we're steaming towards the 6:30. But I'm curious, being, you know, you do many things, but with that Mothers Out Front, it seems to me that it's really trying to ground climate activism in the family and really connect, you know, family experiences and family relationships in that. And I wonder if there's something that you could just say about how that sort of the role for families, considerations about family life and family health and well-being in this struggle for climate justice.
Yeah, you know, yeah, we are focused on families, you know, and you know, we're called Mothers Out Front, but it's something like, you know, Anusha, Mothers and Others. It's actually Mothers and Others too, because we work with, you know, single dads. We work with, you know, folks that don't even have children, but they just, you know, want to support and they relate and then they identify with our movement. And really the focus is to, you know, come to our families, you know, meet people where they are and work with them at you know, where they are. And basically we're trying to lift up moms that feel unseen and unheard, but are just as concerned because, you know, they're, you know, juggling, like moms, we juggle everything and we're still we're like on top of everything. But we are, you know, empowering our moms and, you know, empowering our children, just like, you know, Xochitl, you know, her mom, Lupita, is part of Mothers Out Front, you know, and, you know, Xochitl is here as a panelist, and, you know, not like I'm taking credit, Lupita is, that's, you know, that's her baby, right? But, we're trying to empower moms so that, and it doesn't, not all moms are ready to go from like, mom to like, I'm like now at front of the Capitol. No, some of them want to be like behind the scene, but really, and that's what I mean, meeting families where they're at, and, really empowering them to participate, where they're comfortable at, and then building off that. It's like, okay, is it wherever you're comfortable, I'm gonna meet you where you're at and work with you there, and not make you feel guilty if you can't do X, Y, or Z, because guess what, I know what that's like too, and it's not cool. So really just yeah, that is really how we build leaders, is understanding where they're working from, giving them resources, and also when I say that, it's like, oh, what can we do to support you to be engaged or active, and there's plenty of things that folks can do, like whether it's like doing something at home with your kids, to practice gardening, or practice writing something, with your student, a report on climate change, on how they're being impacted, and sharing that, with their students. Candace, who is also on this panel, yes, her son organized like one of our first like climate actions at his school, and he did an amazing job, and we showed up to support him. And and that was at Peregrine School. So we, it's things like that. It's like engaging with families where they're at and how they can, and then seeing the outcome of those steps, right? And so yeah, it's just about those little things, and then building from that, and then seeing the results, and then spreading that around.
There we go. That's really, really powerful, and it's a perfect cap actually to this, because you talked about meeting people where they're at, which is in their homes, in their families, in their communities, and at the same time, we're thinking about these large global systems. Someone wrote in the chat, because capitalism. So we really need to think about these economic structures, these sort of cultural, social structures of systemic racism. And really link that really intense global analysis with that deep local grounding. So thank you to the three of you, Marlon, Anush, Adalita. Really, so much wisdom that you've shared, and a lot more I know that you could. So I'm going to turn back over to Carrie, and I think we've got one more item, and then we will close out. So Carrie.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you so much to all of the panelists. We have two more polling questions. We spread them out so that we could address various topics. The next polling question is on infrastructure and buildings. And again, if you hit the maximize button at the top of the screen, you can see all of the choices simultaneously. If you do have other choices that you think are more important than what is on the screen, you can add that in the chat. So we'll give you several minutes to fill this out. I will remind everyone, while you're looking at the options in the questions, we will finish up the main part of the workshop with key takeaways and summary by Gloria Partida and Jonathan London, our moderators. And following that, we will have the opportunity for the panelists who can stay on and the community members to have a conversation. So we'll be on, staff will be on for at least an hour well, I should say for an hour, to listen to your input and comments. So we look forward to that conversation. The other thing I will mention while we're doing the polling question is that this workshop is the second of 2 introductory workshops. This one related on community resilience and equity, and the previous one on some of the co-benefits and actions that we may want to take. But these are introductory and will be followed by a series of workshops mostly in July, possibly one starting in late June, but mostly in July and August, that will address some of the actions that we want to evaluate, prioritize, and select. So that's when we're going to start talking about the real steps that we need to take to create our roadmap to carbon neutrality by 2040, with an interim goal of 2030. And as I mentioned in the chat, those actions are going to be evaluated through looking at what their potential for greenhouse gas reduction is, by looking at the various co-benefits that they provide in addition to addressing climate risk and reducing carbon. And some of those co-benefits can be some of the things that we're talking about here in these polls. And finally, by feasibility. And feasibility includes, do we have local control over these issues? Are they cost effective? Do we have funding identified for them? So those are the types of questions that we're going to ask. That doesn't mean that those priorities are not the only things that we want to do, but we obviously can only take care of the issues that we have some local control over. So maybe another 20 seconds for the poll. It looks like we have almost 80% of people have voted. And then we will have a final poll related to transportation. So now we can see the poll results, and the highest ranking option is to upgrade energy efficiency performance standards for landlords of rental properties, which is something that we can do within the City of Davis local control. The second highest ranking option is to provide energy efficiency funding and incentives to property owners and landlords. And the third highest ranked selection is the investing in community solar energy sources and battery storage. So these pieces of information will get wrapped into our discussion of the actions and priorities that we will be selecting. And I think we can go on to the final poll related to transportation, which I know is something you have all been waiting for. So. Again, we'll just mention that there may be some thoughts that you have about transportation that are not offered here. You have the option of putting it in the chat right now, or using that email that we'll put up on the screen again at the end of this workshop. The email that goes to the city team, which is it's CAP, C-A-A-P at cityofdavis.org. Because we are finding a multitude of ways for getting input on this process. Some of the ways that we're promoting input are that we are going to be doing some focus group sessions with specific sets of community members. We have a few that are scheduled right now and some others that we would like to do. We will probably be tabling at the farmers market during the month of June. And suggestions for ways that we can reach out are welcome, although we do have quite a slate of ways to reach out. And one of the best things you can do is to go to the website and take a look at what we've already done and what is upcoming. On the previous two polling times, I did read the question out loud. What can the City of Davis do to prioritize equity and inclusion in the CAP planning and implementation actions, especially for vulnerable and underserved community members, and to select up to 5 responses? Each of these 4 polls have had the same question, so I apologize for not reading that a little earlier. But it looks like we are at the end of this poll, so I think we can stop the poll so that we have a few minutes for wrapping up. And we have a tie. The first of 2 top options receiving well over half of the votes are to provide bikes and electric vehicles but for use by affordable housing residents, and to expand community transit connectivity, transit stops, and frequency. The next top item is to increase electric vehicle adoption through incentive programs for all residents. And so those are our polls. Thank you so much for participating. And I'd like to turn the program over to Gloria and Jonathan at this point to wrap up.
Would you like to go first, Gloria? There you are. You're muted. You're muted, Gloria.
After a year on Zoom, you think that you would
Yeah.
still, you'd get that right, but still not. Okay. I'd like to thank the panelists that gave their time this evening. I really appreciate and am really honored that they took the time to share their knowledge and their experiences with us. And I'd also like to thank again the city who is working on this. And I think that, with that said, I think that what stood out for me is, again, that the people who are not here this evening and the people that are here this evening. So, in the activist world, it's always the same few activists that are stepping forward all the time. And I, very much appreciate that they are. But there's a reason for that. It's, very often the people who are the most vulnerable and who are the most affected don't have the resources to show up for these types of places, to these spaces where their voices can be heard. And I know that, as I mentioned earlier, that we really did try to reach out, and we really did try to, have other people come forward. And I want us to be very aware of that. I want us, Adelita mentioned meeting people where they're at, and we absolutely have to go out and gather the information and input and education where people are at. So I think that the challenge in identifying environmental equity needs in Davis is very similar to other equity work in Davis, that there's an invisibility to the needs because it's not sitting in everyone's living room. I mean, and especially the people that are here this evening. But for the communities that are affected, there are very real issues, and oftentimes people don't even know that they're having these, that this is something that can be remedied and that it is an issue. You know, for school children whose parents don't want to run the air conditioner because they're afraid of running up their electric bills, and so they're, you know, not able to concentrate as well as they could, or, you know, the harmony of your house. And people have, my air conditioner was broken for like 3 days in the hottest part of the summer one year, and I can tell you that I had some really grumpy teenagers. And so it's that, I mean, that's a real thing when you think about like domestic violence, and you think about how much that affects a family's life. In the elderly and disabled, I mentioned that my son has got cerebral palsy. He doesn't thermoregulate very well, and he doesn't know when he's overheated. And so we have to, you know, constantly remind him to stay hydrated. We have to constantly remind him to even like move out of the sun. And so, you know, that's a reality for people. And for people who worry about like high water bills, who will not plant trees, who will not maintain their trees because, you know, it's grocery bills or it's watering your tree. You're not going to water your tree. And then, you know, the air quality, people who can work 8 hours a day in an airtight filtered building are, you know, at a much better advantage than those who have to work outside. And I know that, you know, Carrie really tried to reach out even to the unions to you know, to ask if there were, you know, people who did construction that wanted to come and participate in this panel. A lot of our undocumented workers, or a lot of people who have worked in the fields, have moved into construction because it's higher paying, and they're often end up as roofers, where it's really hot up on a roof in the middle of the summer. And so I want us to make sure that we think about meeting people, you know, where they're at, and building leaders. Building leaders is like the other piece that I think is so important, and getting the education out to children. And Xochitl, I, you know, so admire you being here, and it's so hopeful for me to see you here, and that, you know, our youth can really influence their peers and influence their parents. So I mentioned that, you know, where I was at, the environment was one of the first things that I became aware of. And that was because I had, you know, a pair of these, you know, really extreme hippie teachers in junior high. And, you know, first of all, I couldn't stop staring at them because they were so strange to me. But they also gave me so much knowledge, and I was able to like carry that forward. So we have to get the knowledge out. So with that, I will turn it over to Jonathan.
Great, thanks so much, Gloria. Yeah, very, very powerful. You laid out many things I was going to say, in fact. So that's good. I can make it briefer. So I am very appreciative of the city for putting this on and really having an event focused on justice and equity. Sometimes that is not put at the center of climate change work, that it can be very overly technical. It could focus on the global instead of on the local. It can really miss the voices of the people who are most affected, just exactly as you were saying, Gloria. It cannot include in the planning and the decision making those people who are most affected. So it can actually make the planning process, and the planning documents can actually, you know, make climate injustice worse. So by really flipping that script and putting those kinds of equity issues at the center of the planning and trying as best we can, or as best the city could, to put people who are working with these issues and affected by these issues day to day at the center, that's a really crucial step towards achieving climate justice. And I say it a step towards because this is a long journey. It's certainly not going to be solved in one workshop. And it can't even be solved in one city, as wonderful as our city is. It's really a much larger effort. So this is just so important that people are involved with this. So as I was looking over, both panels and really appreciating the contributions of everyone, it sort of comes together that thinking about climate justice requires that we look at, I think I forget who had said it in the chat, but maybe it was Anush who said climate debt. So you really need to think about who are the people who are most responsible for the climate disruption that we have, and who is the most affected. And those are almost always different people. And you can kind of guess who is who. So really thinking about that issue of responsibility and impact, thinking about, who has the options to adapt to change. And again, Gloria talked about all those different dimensions going through the day of what's happening at the house, what's happening where you work, what's happening in the broader community, and what are all the places that you are affected. And then again, who is included or excluded from the process. So all of these different dimensions of climate equity. So I was really hearing a number of specific themes. One was leadership. And really, prioritizing and lifting up the voices of youth back to, in the K-12 and into college. That's such a crucial set of expertise, a crucial source of energy, and a real critique and understanding of the world that sometimes older folks don't have, or we don't want to see. Also thinking about other marginalized groups, not just based on age, but also immigrants, farm workers, indigenous people, people who are some people of color, low-income people, seen as disposable, and in fact they are indispensable, not disposable at all. People working, as Natalia is saying here, people speaking languages other than English. Also thinking about all the different kinds of issues that were raised, and it's complex dealing with this climate equity, because all of these issues are connected. So really have to think about affordable housing, and there is so much work around general plans and housing elements as a focus area. Thinking about transit access. I mean, the Biden infrastructure bill, there's going to be a lot of money coming down. We really need to think about how that's going to be prioritized and who's benefiting. Thinking about energy, a very robust conversation verbally and in the chat about access to solar, incentives, who's really benefiting, what are some options besides investor owned. Labor, thinking about the green economy, and structurally thinking about exploitative capitalist systems. Heat, there was actually Alan Hirsch shared with me these great Lorax PowerPoints about heat islands in Davis and this sort of 30,000 foot level, and you can really see the inequities there. So something important to look at. And air quality, goes without saying, so important. And I would add policing, which is kind of something that hasn't been mentioned today, but really thinking about who feels safe, who feels welcome in the community. That is also, a crucial piece. Thank you, Natalia. Also water justice, and both who has access to it, what kind of cost does it have, what kind of quality does it have. So the list can go on. And we need to continue to think creatively about what are all the different issues that we need to connect together to talk about climate justice. So I'll close it there. My final remarks there. I'm not sure who talks longer, politicians or academics. Maybe it's a it's a battle. But thank you, everyone. Again, great to be part of this, and I look forward to staying engaged. And back to you, Carrie.
Well, thank you to everyone for being in the meeting. I'd like to note that in the video, you can see the way that you can add your name and contact information in the chat. And we will make sure that you're on the listserv for the CAP. We do have the online survey available on the website, and that will be closing soon. So if you would like to address some of these issues, we have the webpage is on the city's page, so you can go there and find climate action and adaptation plan in the spotlight section. And we've also mentioned the fact that the email is available for your use, and that is on the website as well. We are going to stay available for another 45 minutes or so that community members who have been listening and responding to this through the chat will have a chance to make their comments heard. But first, I'd like to give Diana Jensen, the project director, a chance to say a few words, and then we will open up to the community participation.
Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, I just want to say thank you to all of the panelists and the moderators. That was a great discussion. We really appreciate your time and thoughtfulness and your questions and answers. That was very helpful. And thanks to everyone in the community who came to listen. And please, feel free to ask questions and have some dialogue. I think the easiest way to do it is if you can use the raise hand option on the Zoom buttons. And then Jennifer, if you'll call out who has their hand raised first and let them speak, that would be great. Thank you.
All right, it looks like Alan has his hand raised first. Go ahead, Alan.
Alan, I think you're on mute. So if you want to say something, can you unmute?
Hi, Alan Hurst. Thank you. Sometimes there is an affordable housing problem, but it's hard to link affordable housing directly with greenhouse gas reduction, which is the climate change thing interest. Certainly with the distributional equity problem, I suggest we should call it the problem with affordable housing is geographic equity. We need affordable housing near people's jobs so people can have longer commutes. So poor, less affluent people won't have the longer commutes while the rich can live close to their jobs. I think that linkage of affordable housing in the right place, not just anywhere, but in the right place is really important. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else would like to speak?
If you're having a hard time finding the raise hand button and just want to start talking, as long as we don't step on each other, that's just fine.
Oh, go for it, Alan. Oh, you got to take yourself off mute again.
The raised hand button is in the reaction thing on the bottom. People may not know that.
Good advice.
You can also just wave your hand.
Oh, all right, Larry, you have the floor.
Thanks. This has been a great panel discussion, really helpful, and the chat was actually pretty amazing as well, kind of like a twofer. But this discussion actually seems like it ought to precede the not only the housing plan that's going forward, but the general plan. It is preceding the general plan because, of course, planning and zoning, all that stuff are really, really connected to all this. As people mentioned several times, the transportation element cannot be overstated, and zoning directly affects and how we do that and how available it is to people. Thank you.
Thank you. Juliet, go for it.
Hi, everyone. Wonderful presentations by everyone. It's really great to hear so many community members that we don't usually get to center in these conversations and their recommendations. And I hope that we can all kind of spend some time digesting their words and thinking about the systemic change that's needed here in Davis. And I really I've been doing a lot of tabling around these issues, and I'm amazed at how quickly the kids are like, they've come up with solutions like get rid of the cars, you know, like get rid of the problem, like deal with the root causes of the problems. And I just would like to put a shout out to making you know, bicycling a lot more accessible and affordable. I've heard of places in other cities, comparable cities like maybe Boulder, Colorado, I think, where they gave electric bicycles to essential workers to provide transit, like direct transit solutions. And I just think in a city as wealthy as Davis, that we should be thinking a lot more innovatively about what we've heard today and prioritizing the needs of community members. Absolutely, affordable housing has to be a priority. I've heard a lot about needing to rezone a lot of the suburban type of housing, single family housing zoning to allow for much greater density. I've heard things about getting rid of the banks downtown, the buildings that are one story that need to be replaced by much higher 3-4 story buildings. So I think these solutions are going to require things like public financing and public banking because they need the financing. But I think that this city also has a lot of capacity to finance the solutions to these problems within our own community. So I'm thinking about how do we get a bond measure on the ballot that actually finances the systemic solutions that center equity and the needs of the communities that we were hearing about today. Thank you.
Yeah, really good feedback. Thank you. Anyone else? Raise your hand or just speak.
I think if there are some panelists that have some further thoughts, you are welcome to speak up now as well, or community members.
Hi, this is Ken Foster. I was saying at the beginning that I had a little bit of a list, but just ensuring, you know, I know that a lot of the environmental justice, poor people suffer the most from climate change and are exposed to greater levels of air pollution for not having access to, you know, education, and they can't afford, you know, electric cars, or, you know, even going to the bike kitchen sometimes. My kids have to fix certain bikes and they can't, sometimes we can't afford to have them all fix the bike at the same time. So they'll be sharing bikes. So stuff like that. If there was a place where people raise money so that there could be a certain amount of money for people that need those kind of services, since we do have a lot of bike kitchens. And then let me see. Folks with less income in Davis don't always have savings for extra funds. And, you know, if they do have to evacuate permanently, that could lead to homelessness. Lower income community members still have to go to work. You know, I mentioned that earlier. Unsafe pollution days, they still have to go to work. I think that the digital divide is a big issue that we have. And then also with people obtaining knowledge around the effects that are affecting their family, and how could we make it so that they could be informed, whether it be in different languages or, you know, having community picnics or festivals that surround this information. Luckily, we have, you know, Mothers Out Front. Mothers Out Front has come to us. They've come to our apartment. They have brought us, you know, paid for us to go to different rallies. We've been able to experience things that we've never even had access to understanding, and being educated made people want to contribute more. So these are just some things that I had listed that I didn't talk about earlier. The gas leak that we recently had on Monday, I mean, I don't know the future effects of, you know, the physical future effects that my children and my family might have. But when I did some research, because I had the privilege of having time to do the research, I found out that, you know, difficult in breathing, fatigue, headaches, you know, all kinds of different things. Not everybody in our community knew that there was this gas leak. There's elders in our community that I called to tell them, you know, like, it's very close to your home. So please be aware and let me know that you're safe. So I don't know if there's like a text. I know there was some kind of text, a Davis, where you could text, and then they would text you back if there's any kind of emergencies. But I feel like something like that gas leak that was exploding for about 2 hours is something that everybody should be aware of. So thank you for giving me time to share space.
Yeah, thank you very much for all of that information. Alan, go ahead again. Alan, you're on mute still.
Thank you for letting me speak. Yeah, I hope you're not giving my priority over other people who have spoken, need to spoke. I want to put a plug for joining city commissions and even the county commissions. For example, the County Transportation Commission needs members. We need some energy and some activism, and even just attending the meetings and asking questions can be a real catalyst for change. I know the Natural Resources Commission, I believe, has a policy that basically, if you put together a well put together slide presentation, you can get more than the 2 minutes. You can get a 10-minute presentation to present new ideas. So there are lots of things you can do on the commissions or as a public member, monitoring and getting involved with the commissions. Helping our staff is stretched real thin. You can bring new ideas to these commissions and sit on the and be a shadow member. So there's lots of ways to make a difference, to contribute to the ongoing process. So and help our staff, which is stretched so thin. Carrie's doing so much. I really appreciate this work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. John, go ahead.
So I think I want to put in a follow-up on what Juliet was talking about in terms of financing. As I was following the chat, there was this theme about folks who have benefited, perhaps need to contribute, have benefited from climate disruption, or have taken the benefits of large CO2 emissions, let's put it that way, perhaps have a little more responsibility to contribute to the solutions. And then on the other side, that the biggest problem for a lot of disadvantaged communities is not that we don't know what to do, is that you can't afford to do it. And so the idea of I don't think I'd go for a bond, but a financial mechanism of some kind, maybe it's a parcel tax that becomes a granting agency or a granting fund, a community improvement fund where we can collect money inside to use, or yes, that we can use for whoever needs to upgrade their systems, because I can upgrade my house, but if a rundown house on the other side of town is using lots of electricity and natural gas because they don't have the insulation, that's hurting me as well. And so it makes some sense, maybe as a mechanism for doing a little bit of transfer of resources and improving the environment for everybody, that a financial mechanism would be an interesting part and useful part as part of the plan at the end.
Yeah, very interesting. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Oh. We have not mentioned anything about homelessness and the homeless, but I really do believe that they are part of that extremely vulnerable community, and we need to find ways to house the homeless, not just house them, but bring them into the entire social structure. So that's a big project all on its own, but I think it certainly pertains to climate justice. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that. All right. Anyone else?
So Carrie, maybe do you want to just remind everybody again of the next steps coming up for the CAP?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Following this sort of like looking at introductory issues and identifying some of the issues that are important to the community. And I think we got a lot of information on the polling questions tonight that has been very valuable, as well as other outreach that we're planning. So we do have some outreach planned, and we'll do some other work in June to reach out to other members of the community. And then starting mid-June, we're really planning our next set of workshops, which are to bring to the community some of the proposed climate action climate actions, mitigation and adaptation that we have heard and will propose, and get some community input on that through at least 2 types of workshops. We're calling them, we need better names, but we have workshop 2 and workshop 3, which reminds me of kind of Dr. Seuss, them popping out of a hat or something. But they really are important, serious topics about some of the types of actions related to the built environment and to transportation and all of the related issues to that. And each of those workshops will most likely be repeated twice at different times. And like all the workshops, everything is recorded and is put on our website. So that outreach will help us determine what the highest action items are by using a tool that we'll be working with the consultant on that will help with evaluating some of the issues that I mentioned earlier, the greenhouse gas reduction effectiveness, the co-benefits, and the feasibility of each of the actions, so that we know which are the ones that are going to be the most optimal for Davis to select to create our roadmap to carbon neutrality, because that's the most important part of this process, is that we want to have a plan that is measurable and enforceable, and we know where we are on our path, and that it includes equity and inclusivity. So more will be brought forward on that information. And Diana, I'm sure you have something that you might like to add.
Thank you. Yeah, that pretty much sums up what I wanted to touch on, just to let people know kind of what's coming next. And you know, if you haven't had the time to look through our website, there's a lot of information there. So I highly recommend that you do that. And if you do have any further thoughts after reflection on this evening, please email our project team. We'd really appreciate that. And I just, again, want to thank the panelists. Those were great discussions, and thank everyone in the community for participating tonight. I really appreciate it. And with that, I think we can close the meeting.
Thank you, everyone. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. Bye.